Hey, what's going on YouTube? Or Storm here coming at you guys with another deck profile today. This will be the first part of the whole intro to the series I've been doing for a while. Now, this week we're going to be introducing Wing Raiders decks. Wing Raiders is coming down on Friday. We're getting 3 new decks. We're getting Phantom Knights, Raid Raptors are getting pretty much revamped with a few new support cards, and Super Quantums. Super Quantums and Raid Raptors will be later. I also want to say that some of the cards that are featured in this video may or may not be concluded in the set. I don't know because the set hasn't been fully confirmed. But for the most part, that's why I'm doing Phantom Knights first, because most of these cards have been confirmed. So with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about some cards I've seen people play and how I think they work in the deck. So first off, I've seen some people running more discard outlet cards like Phoenix Wing, Wing Blast, and Karma Cut. I've seen Wing Blast is actually probably the better of the two cards, but the problem I have with these cards is it's sort of a lot like MST versus Twin Twister. MST, the reason Konami created Twin Twister is because MST has almost been power creep, that 1-for-1s just aren't really good enough. And I think there are some decks that can't really afford the discard cost of Twin Twister, but it's still, that's kind of I feel like Wing Blast and Karma Cut are in a similar, excuse me, are in a similar boat to MST right now. They are great cards. They are still great cards in certain decks. But if you're playing like Cosmos I think just the invention of Cosmos, the spamming of the pendulum mechanic, just literally just power creep these cards. I just don't feel like even if you look at any Burning Abyss list, like they're not playing these cards anymore because they've been power creeped in hell. Some of them are even side decking Fire Lake, which is just insane. Like a few months ago, I would have said Fire Lake should have probably been hit to 1 or so. But anyway, and then I have seen some people playing like the Turbo Mill version with cards like Needlebug Glass and Lightsworn cards. Those decks can work, but those types of builds are going to be inherently inconsistent. And now that's not to say you shouldn't run Dante in your Astro deck and make Dante early game. Dante is a great card in this deck early game. You get the ball rolling, you get your setup ready to go. But I've never really been a big fan of cards like Needlebug Nest because it's a trap card. It's a bit slower. And granted, it is Twin Twister and MST bait, but I'm just not a big fan of milling 5 cards, because Infernoids, I wasn't running this card either. I just feel like, you can play the mill version, but it's going to be inherently more inconsistent. I have some builds, including on my channel, that do run a mini Speedroid engine. Usually that engine involves a few copies of 3 copies of Terratop, 2 Taken Tomborg over here, and 2 Triad Dice. Because these cards are also level 3, which means you can make rank 3s with them, and also you can make Trishula, which is always an optimal play. Shout out to you know where the reference is from. But being able to make Trish also gives you a lot of problems this deck has, dealing with big boss monsters such as Dark Destroyer that cannot be destroyed, cannot be targeted. It's a bit of a pain to deal with this deck, quite frankly. So, the Speedroid engine kind of helps to deal with that because you can make Trishula, Mistworm, cards like that allow you to get over it. You can, but you don't need to. But anyway, all that out of the way, let's go ahead and get to the deck profile and talk about the monsters. So, Phantom Knights are a dark warrior-based attribute, or they're dark attribute warrior-based archetype that are used by Yugioh in anime. If you haven't watched Dark 5, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but let's just say he doesn't get a lot of screen time, unfortunately. So that means we don't have a lot of Phantom Knight cards, and that's unfortunate because the deck actually has some pretty decent cards in it. But because of that, there's not a lot of support for the deck. So you kind of have to use a lot of outside cards such as Armageddon Knight, Kagamucha Knight to really give the deck a little bit more oomph. So let's go ahead and get to the deck profile. So first off, 3 copies of Ancient Cloak, which I believe Ancient Cloak was confirmed as an ultra rare, and it's not a surprise now. All Phantom Knight monsters have 1 effect on field and 1 effect in graveyard that activates by banishing them. So basically, they banish themselves from the grave to activate. So Ancient Cloak's on-field effect is it's an attack mode. It can target a dark monster on the field. You can flip it to defense mode, and that target you just targeted gains 800 attack and defense until the end of the opponent's turn. It also can target yourself, but usually you're gonna have something like Breaksword, Alucard, or Dark Rebellion, Exceed Dragon out. You're gonna be buffing that, not himself, but it's an option if you really need to. It also can banish it from your graveyard to add one Phantom Knights card from your deck to your hand. So much like all the Phantom Knights, you can only use either effect once per turn. They all have that restriction. So this is probably one of the most important cards in the archetype, and it has pretty cool artwork. I like how it seems to have like a cape, just like Yugioh has in the anime. And then 3 copies of the Phantom Knights of Cracked Helm. I notice a lot of players don't even run this card. I'm always surprised because it's actually really good. So when it's on the field, if a Phantom Knights card or Phantom Knights spell or trap is sent to the grave in any means it gains 500 attack. What makes that effect so good is the fact that you can trigger it yourself. If you decide to run cards like Wing Blast, or in this build I'm running Twin Twister and Booby Trap E, you pitch a Phantom Knight card and your opponent tries to attack with your monster, it'll get buffed and their monster will die. So basically what I like about this card is it can buff it. You can also be responsive and buff itself, which is really good. You can also banish it from the grave to add one to recycle your Phantom Knight cards during your end phase. So it makes your discard cards live, which is really good. It's the beefiest. It's by far the beefiest monster in the archetype. So I feel like I want to run 3 because I can kind of deal with my opponent's stuff while this is on the field. Then 2 copies of the Phantom Knights of Fragile Armor. Now, Fragile Armor is sort of like a Bujin Mikazuki for you guys who play Bujins out there. Basically, if a Phantom Knight's monsters, and it's got in parentheses, you control is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can special summon this card from your hand. It's got 2k defense, so typically if they do happen to wipe your field, they're going to have a little bit more trouble getting over this because it's a big monster. And then its banish effect is that you can banish it from the grave to send one Phantom Knight card to your graveyard to draw a card. Basically allows you to give you a bit more draw power, kind of like thin out your deck a bit. So I found any more than 2 to be really, really cloggy because you don't really want multiple copies of this card in your hand because you can't special multiple copies at the same time. So it's definitely something to remember. And then 3 copies of the Phantom Knights of, I think it was Rugged Glove in the OC, but I don't know if the Rugged Glove basically. This card, by banishing itself, can send a Phantom Knights monster card or a Phantom spell or trap card to your deck to your graveyard. Basically, it is a setup card. It basically allows you to send whatever you need to the grave by banishing itself, and then you can banish that to do whatever. So basically, it's a setup card, and then when it is used as an exceed material, when that monster is exceed summoned, it gains 1,000 attack, which that also doesn't just count Breaksword. That counts Alucard, that counts Dark Rebellion if it's a level 4 monster. Basically, if it's used to make a level any kind of dark type exceed summon, that monster gains 1,000 attack. But of course, both effects are once per turn, so you can't like blow up your Breaksword then get a 3,500 Dark Rebellion. It doesn't work that way if you've used the effect. Then the last Phantom Knight monster I play is 3 copies of Phantom Knights of Silent Boots. Now, this card is a lot like, if any of you guys out there play Black Wings, you understand, you're probably going to be familiar with how this card works. Basically, if you control a Phantom Knights monster, you can special summon this card from your hand, but all like other Black Wing monsters, it's once per turn. But this is much like Ancient Cloak, but instead of searching Phantom Knight cards, it's just Phantom, or it searches Phantom or Phantom Knight spell or trap cards from your deck to your hand. Basically, it makes your Fog Blades and your Phantom Swords searchable, which is really, really good. And it's probably one of the key cards in the deck. Now we're coming to some of the outside archetype support. So 1 Mathman and 2 Armageddon Knights. These cards are. I wish Mathman was at 3 because this card's a lot better in the deck because it's a level 3, which means that like you can still use it exceed material, but like it's at 1. And Armageddon Knight, these are basically like your graveyard setup cards. You got a good play first turn, you normal them, and send whatever you need and kind of get your initial combo going. Like I said about Dante, it's a similar thing. Two Kagemucha Knights, a lot of you guys probably haven't ever actually seen this card used, but basically this card says when you normal summon a level 3 monster, you can special summon this card from your hand, and this cannot be used as synchro material. So it's sort of like a Kage Tokage for level 3s. I believe it came out in one of the 2012 Collector's Tin. I think that was the same tin that had Master Hero Acid. Basically, it's just like a Kage Tokage. You normal one of these, special this, and then you can go in for your rank 3 play. Then lastly, 2 copies of Marauding Captain. Marauding Captain is one of my favorite kind of old school Yu-Gi-Oh cards. I like how you see it in a lot of other different artworks. Basically, when you normal summon this, the first effect is your opponent cannot target warrior monsters for attack except this one. But the main effect you care about is when it's normal summon, you special summon 1 level 4 or lower monster from your hand. Allows you to get, and you remember with Marauding Captain is like, the key thing to remember is if you do decide to special summon an Armageddon Knight off of it, you can still activate the effect. It's whenever Armageddon Knight activates, whenever it's summoned. Now for the spell cards, these are a lot of the 1-0s. One, Burial from a Different Dimension. You have a deck that banishes, so you're probably running this because you have a deck that you're going to easily load up your banish zone, so you probably want to run this, definitely. One Foolish Burial, this kind of speaks for itself. Everything, you're running a deck that's like everything works in Graves, so you kind of run Foolish Burial. One copy of Allure of Darkness, got, I think you've got like 17, like a pretty high amount of dark monsters, so Allure is really good. Regeki, I know a lot of people are cutting this card, but like I still like, even if it only clears my opponent's field for one turn, being able to clear their board and make sure I can get my damage in safely is pretty good, even if it's only for a turn. That's a lot of time, that's all you're going to need against a lot of decks. One Reinforcement Army, like I said earlier, I wish this card was at 3, but it's at 1, but you still need to run it because it's a consistency card. Then 2 copies of Magic Planner. I really like Magic Planner in this deck, mostly because Booby Trap E exists, but being able to send your dead Fog Blades to the grave and draw cards is really good. 2 is kind of enough. It's the right number, and it's gonna make more sense later. Then 2 copies of Twin Twister. Twin Twister is a lot better in this deck because like you want your stuff engraved anyways, so Twin Twister is a little bit better. Now for the traps. Now this card I believe was used by Yugioh in the anime as well. So this card is known as Booby Trap E. I think this card actually has a lot of uses outside of Phantom Knights, but this particular deck makes the great use of it as well. So you can discard 1 card, set 1 continuous trap card from your hand or graveyard. That set card can be activated during this turn. So Booby Trap E is really good because it allows you to reuse your continuous trap cards. It works really well in combination with Magic Planner because it makes sure your cards are always live, and that's really important. You can literally run these 2 cards and then run a bunch of continuous traps in a lot of decks, and it works. Now, obviously, a lot of decks that run these types of heavy floodgates can't afford to pitch a card all the time, but being able to use it on your turn also combos really well together. Like there's a lot of really cool combos you can do. The cool thing you can do actually is you can actually pitch a a card like Vanities and then just reset it and just to disrupt your opponent's plays. So it's pretty good, really good tech card in the deck. Although I wouldn't necessarily call it a tech because Yugioh did use it in the deck in the anime. Then 2 copies of Escape from a Dark Dimension. This card is a lot better than Call of the Haunted in this deck because all your Phantom spells or your Phantom Trap cards basically already do that. So I feel like this card is basically just like having extra copies of it's like a Call of the Haunted except better for this deck because it brings them back from the banish zone, which is really key to the deck, being able to reuse. Now, when it is destroyed, the target is banished, but you need to remember that you're going to be exceeding with that target anyways. So it's like having another way. It's like having 2 more copies of Burial for 1 monster, basically. 3 copies of Phantom Fogblade. Now, this card is actually, I talked about this card in the past. Basically, it's like a New Age Fiendish Chain. You can activate by targeting 1 effect monster on the field. Its effects are negated, but you can't attack that monster, and other monsters can't target it for attacks. One of the things I like about this card is that you can use it both offensively and defensively. You need to remember, though, if you do target a monster with this attack, one of your own monsters with this, you have to target it before they declare an attack, I believe. Like, you can chain Fogblade to your opponent's monster declaring attack and the attack won't go through, but for some reason I remember my opponent, I tried to tech my own monster and the attack still went through. But regardless, this is basically like a New Age Fiendish Chain. Now in this deck, it's the fact that you can't target the monster for attack usually isn't really an issue because Magic Planner is a card, Break Sword is a card, there are enough ways to get this off the field that it's not much of a problem. Basically, it's like a New Age Fiendish Chain, and much like a lot of the Phantom Knight trap cards, you can banish it from the grave to special summon a Phantom Knight's monster from your graveyard, but it's banished when it leaves the field. Most of the time, that's not a problem because you're going to be banishing this, then much like with Escape, you're going to be exceed summoning anyways, so that's not really an issue. It's really, overall, this is probably the best card in the archetype. I believe it was confirmed as an ultra rare, and for good reason, because it's a Fiendish Chain similar card. So, the only thing that I admire about Konami is that they print cards that kind of do the similar thing, but they're different enough to where you can kind of argue one or the other. Then 2 copies of Phantom Sword. This card has actually been really good for me in testing. So the first effect is that you can activate this card by targeting 1 face-up monster on the field. It gains 800 attack. Because it modifies attack, you can chain it during damage steps. So that's kind of a little key thing to remember. Then if it would be if that monster you targeted would be destroyed by battle or card effect, you can destroy this card instead. So one of my funniest things that my opponent will typically, like, say I have like a Dark Rebellion or something like that out. My opponent changed Torrential Tribute when I normal summon one of my Phantom Knights. Well, I can flip Phantom Sword to protect the monster, and on top of that, I can just banish this from the grave to bring the monster they just destroyed. So it's a really good card, and this, much like I said, much like Fogblade, you can banish from the graveyard. It reads exactly the same. You could special summon a Phantom Knight monster from your grave, but it's banished when it leaves the field. Then one copy of Vanity's Emptiness, because we can it's just a stupidly good floodgate. Like, even at 1, it still wins games, and being able to reuse it with Booby Trappy is just dumb. Now for the extra deck, 3 copies of the Phantom Knights of Breaksword. I talked a little bit about this card in the past, but in the actual archetype, it's even better. So once per turn, you can attach an exceeded material card on this card, target one card on each side of the field, destroy them. So basically, it's like a generic rank 3 Scrap Dragon. I don't know whether this will see a ton of play outside of Phantom Knights, but it's definitely, something Burning Abyss, certainly, I feel like, have room in the extra deck. They can find room for this. It's as a one-of. But the key thing is, for Phantom Knights, if this Exceed Summon card is destroyed, you can target one Phantom Knights monster with the same level in your graveyard, special summon them, but their levels are increased by 1. Also, you cannot special Dark monsters for its turn except Dark monsters. Now, why is this good? Multiple reasons this is good. Because you can bring the monsters back when this does happen to bite the dust and make a Dark Rebellion Exceed Dragon, or if you happen to have 2 of these out, you can blow them both up with their own effects and then bring out like a 4 or 5 material Rognominiad. Overall, I feel like what I like about the Exceed Summon part of this, what I liked about this card's Grave Effect is something you can trigger on your own. It doesn't require opponent interaction always to activate, which is really good. If you really wanted to, you could also run a few rank 5s, dark rank 5s, such as Adrius, but overall, this card is just pretty phenomenal for the archetype. And the key thing to remember, it will be at if you summon this with Ragged Gloves, it will be at 3k, which is pretty scary for your opponent. And then 2 copies of Ghost Trick Alucard. I do find myself sometimes making the second one, and I do find like it's really good in this deck because being able to clear set annoying back row threats before you make a push, and plus it's a dark attribute, so it gains attack when you make it with Ragged Gloves, so it kind of just fits in this deck. 2 copies of Leviair. We have so many cards in this deck that get banished. Being able to reuse them is really good. I don't make Leviair as often as Alucard or Breaksword, but I'm certainly glad it's there. 1 copy of Dante. Much like I said, I've seen a lot of players who say they run like 2 or 3 Dantes, and it's understandable because the card is really good in this deck. You don't really, I find it, I make it, if I do make Dante, I make it, if I don't have a great hand early game, I'll just go into Dante, just mill some stuff, and typically if I mill well, it's basically like an initial setup card. I don't feel like you really need more than 1, but you can feel free to run more, because there is room in this extra deck. And copy of Mech-Whipped, to me, Mech-Whipped is always a rank 3 staple, because you have, being able to keep your big boss monsters safe from board wipes is always really good. 1 Nightmare Shark to shoot for game, similar to Burning Abyss. I know I've seen some Burning Abyss builds that ran 2 of this, and for good reason, the card is really good. 1 copy of Wind Up Zenmaines. If you don't open great, it's not, sitting on Zenmaines is still decently viable in the right situations. 1 copy of Downer Magician. I do like Downer Magician in this deck because sometimes my opponent will say they Fiendish Chain my Breaksword, where I can just stack Downer right on top of it and just continue to attack anyway. That's sort of the point of this card. If you have it, or if you have a Dante or Zenmaines that's down on materials, you can just stack Downer on top of it. It is a dark attribute, so if you do use Breaksword's effect and you happen to have another XYZ on the field, you can stack this on top. And then for the rank 4s, 2 copies of Dark Rebellion Exceed Dragon. I will say I don't always make the second one, but having it there is pretty nice. I like having the option to make the second one. There's a lot of other cards you can run as well, like Evil Swarm Nightmare. I think it's also getting reprinted in the set. This card is actually not bad either in the deck as well. But I just find that having this is really, Dark Rebellion is basically like all I've needed. Then of course one copy of Rognominiad. This card is probably the most explosive play this deck can make, at least as a standard deck, because it is not hard to make a 5 material Rognominiad if you play the deck properly, because if you just blow up 2 of your own Breakswords, bring all the materials back, special summon a fragile armor off the effect, you have a 5 material Ragnamidi right there. And if you summon this card with 4 or 5 materials, you should win the game. This card is just absolutely insane, and the fact that it's a dark attribute is just great. So anyway, guys, as always, I thank you guys for watching my video today. Really appreciate it when you guys watch my videos. Tune in later this week for the Raid Raptor revamp and for Wing Raiders as well as the Super Quantums. So anyway, guys, as always, thank you guys for watching. Storm signing out.